We start with a look back, a memory that feels distant now. It begins with a thought about how there was absolutely no such thing as fate in their meeting, a realization that hits hard in hindsight. We see a man, Heiner, walking through a lush, bright garden, his uniform dark against the vibrant greenery. Annette recalls how her philosophy teacher once told her that fate simply didn't exist. Heiner's footsteps crunch against the gravel, a steady, rhythmic sound as he approaches. But looking at him then with the sun in his eyes, it was easy to dismiss that lesson. The narrative shifts to a heavy realization. The moment humans accept random chance as something inevitable, that is when they trap themselves. We see the top of a lace parasol, delicate and shielding someone from the sun while the footsteps get closer, and that is what humans mistakenly call fate. Annette stands there beneath the parasol, surrounded by blooming roses, looking like the picture of innocence. If those words about fate not existing are true, then the implication is devastating for them. Heiner stops before her, and they look at each other in this idyllic setting, but the context has changed completely in her mind. It means that fate never existed for them at all. The scene shifts abruptly to the present, inside a dim room, where the rustle of a dress breaks the silence. Annette stands at a heavy wooden door, her hand resting on the handle, hesitating. She opens it, stepping into a tense atmosphere. She walks forward and places a white envelope on the desk with a heavy thunk, the sound echoing in the quiet room. She calls his name softly, Heiner. He is sitting there, writing. The only response she gets is the scratching sound of his pen against paper. She asks him, with a tremor in her voice, if he won't read the letter she just placed down. We see the letter closer. It's addressed simply to Ms. Rosenberg, to be opened only by her, a stark formality that feels cold. Heiner barely acknowledges her presence, telling her he's busy at the moment and that they will talk later, his pen never stopping. The scratching sound continues. She mentions that she went through some trouble digging up his past, trying to get a reaction. The pen finally stops with a sharp tack. She says his name again, trying to bridge the distance between them. Silence hangs heavy in the air for a moment. She grips her dress, wiping her sweaty palms, and admits that she has always wondered about something. Her hand squeezes the fabric tight as she asks why he is like this to her. She is desperate to know why someone who loved her so dearly changed so completely. Tears well up in her large blue eyes, shimmering with hurt. She tells him that even if he fell out of love, this treatment is too much to bear. Heiner finally speaks her name, Annette, but his tone isn't comforting. She cuts in, saying that she knows now. She accuses him of approaching her with ulterior motives from the very start. Heiner laughs. It's a dry, humorless sound. He doesn't deny it. Annette covers her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and pain. She remarks bitterly that it must have been difficult for him, pretending to love the daughter of his enemy. We see a flashback of a hand placing a ring on a finger, a memory of their engagement. She realizes that the meeting she had regarded as fate was nothing of the sort. We see Heiner in his white dress uniform, looking handsome and dashing, a perfect image of a lover, but it had all been under his control, a calculated maneuver. She remembers her own smiling face on her wedding day, blushing and happy, completely unaware. They kiss at the altar, a picture-perfect moment that was built on a lie. She understands now that she had been played by Heiner from the very beginning. The scene pulls back to show a grand palace, the seat of power in the kingdom of Pedania. Annette explains her lineage. Her father, Marquis Dietrich Rosenberg, was the king's nephew. They were part of the royal family, the elite of the elite. We see her father, a stern-looking man in a decorated uniform, praising Heiner, calling him Waldemar, and saying he never disappoints. Heiner stands before him, sword drawn, looking dutiful and loyal. Her father was the general of the Pedania army. Commander Heiner Waldemar was one of her father's soldiers, a trusted subordinate. She recalls that fateful meeting at the Rosenberg mansion when the roses were in full bloom, the setting of their romance. It was followed by a 2-year courtship and then marriage, but then the world turned upside down. We hear the cheers of the rebellion, shouting that the king has been defeated. The royal family fell to the rebellion and the nobles met their downfall. Her father was killed by the rebels, and in her grief her mother took her own life. Annette stands in the chaos, looking at the commander-in-chief of the rebellion. It was Heiner. She stammers his name, unable to comprehend the betrayal. Even if he had betrayed her father, she had still trusted Heiner personally. And that was when he turned into someone different. She remembers him slapping her hand away, a sharp physical rejection that shocked her. He walks away from her, his footsteps heavy and cold. She never imagined that he had approached her on purpose, that the deception went back that far. Outside, the crowds chanted for the fall of the Rosenbergs. They demanded Annette Rosenberg's head. Despite this, she tried to understand him. She told herself he had no other choice because the times were changing. We see her profile, looking sad and resigned. The chants for her death were loud, but she stayed because she blindly trusted his love. She sits by a stained glass window, flinching at the sounds outside. However, the reality was harsh. She was the only daughter of the military officer who oppressed the rebels. She was seen as a superficial woman who profited off the blood of others. She sits with her head in her hands, overwhelmed. Despite knowing nothing about politics, she took on all the burden of that hatred. She was alive, but she wasn't living. She was left all alone in every space she existed in. She waited, hoping he would stand by her, but she was left in isolation. She asked herself constantly what she had done wrong. She wondered if she should never have even existed. She clutches the letter in her hand, the paper rustling. The answer to all those agonizing questions finally reached her in the form of a single letter. She tried everything to change his mind like a fool. We see her holding a letter opener, her expression desolate. The realization hits her fully. He just never loved her from the start. Back in the office, she looks at him, her eyes dull. She asks if she is wrong. He finally answers, looking at her with cold eyes. No. His hands twitch, clasping together tightly. She tells him to go ahead and say it, to yap away, because she needs to hear the truth from him herself. Smirks, a cruel expression crossing his face. He admits it plainly. He loathed her father and the monarchy. That is the simple truth. He leans his chin on his clasped hands, looking relaxed as he delivers the blow. Approaching her was just a part of that plan. That was all it was. Annette stands there, processing this, looking small in the large room. She asks quietly if she is also included in that object of loathing. Heiner looks away, his expression darkening as he thinks back to 2 years ago. He mentions the ruckus over reports that the monarchs were fostering spies. His hand clenches into a fist. He reveals he was a spy at the training camp her father oversaw. We see snippets of documents labeled top secret and lists of names. He talks about how they were killed during missions or eliminated just to keep things secret. A list of crossed out names appears, his friends, his comrades. He alone survived due to his contributions to the kingdom. Having strengthened his position, her father happily kept Heiner by his side, unaware of the hatred brewing. And that is how he met her. He heard she had returned alone. He saw her smiling innocently, draped in jewels and laces, holding a parasol, looking untouched by the world. He recalls her offering condolences to those who sacrificed their lives for the nation. But to him, her speaking of condolence as if she were bestowing something great made him think that something was very wrong with the world. Looks down, his face shadowed. Of course, I despise you. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her heart thumps painfully. She just says, oh. She stands there, simply absorbing it. I see. The answer to her questions was simple. He merely had approached an object of loathing for revenge. She remembers him holding her, smiling at her, but now sees the manipulation behind his eyes. The text emphasizes, Heiner Waldemar despises Annette Rosenberg. Annette feels a strange sense of clarity. That makes things easier, not even knowing that she had loved him. But then Heiner speaks again, interrupting her thoughts. I cannot grant that. She looks confused, telling him that she has nothing left. He stares at her intensely. She realizes that the only thing she does have left is the title of Heiner Waldemar's wife. She tells him his revenge is over. He stands up from his desk with a heavy clunk. He walks around the desk, stepping closer to her. He looms over her, his presence intimidating. He calls her name again, Annette, causing her to flinch. Suddenly he reaches out and grabs her neck, squeezing it. His face is close to hers, filled with anger and possession. He asks how she dares try to be happy elsewhere. She stares back at him, terrified, tears in her eyes. She thinks internally that there is nowhere she can be happy. He leans in closer, his face almost touching hers. He tells her that makes things easier. He whispers a cruel promise. If that's the case anyway, then be forever unhappy by his side. Seeing him enveloped in the scarlet light of the sunset, his figure dark and menacing, makes her realize something. Her heart thumps loudly again. He touches her face, his hand large against her cheek, possessing her. She realizes that this man's revenge has only now begun. In memories, Annette found herself back in a time that felt warm, looking at Heiner with a gaze full of admiration. She asked him how many languages he actually spoke, her voice light and teasing. Heiner looked back at her, his expression gentle, and replied that he knew 4, including the common tongue, since he had learned the Kuyang language as well. Annette beamed at him, genuinely impressed by his aptitude. She confessed that she had been too scared to ever study abroad, admitting with a self-deprecating smile that she didn't have much talent for studying anyway. The memory shifted slightly, flowing into another moment of their shared past. Then came the moment that changed everything. Heiner looked at her, his expression serious and tender, and asked her to marry him. She remembered remembered the feeling of his hands on hers, the slide of the ring onto her finger. It was a promise made of cold metal and warm skin. She called his name, her heart overflowing. Heiner made a vow then. He promised to make her a happy woman forever. The dream shifted to a night scene, the two of them embracing under the moonlight. He held her tight, and the word forever echoed in her mind, sweet and promising. But then the tone of the memory warped. The voice that whispered in her ear grew dark and twisted. Heiner's voice curdled, telling her to be unhappy by his side, forever. Annette flinched violently, her body jerking as she woke up. The brightness of the dream shattered instantly, replaced by the cold, dim reality of her bedroom. She gasped softly, clutching the sheets. Her hands were trembling. It took a moment for her breathing to steady, for the panic to subside enough for her to realize where she was. She clenched her hand into a fist, grounding herself. It had just been a dream, a cruel, haunting dream, but reality wasn't much better. Annette found herself staring at a newspaper, the headlines screaming at her in bold, black ink. It declared the last vestiges of the Padania monarchy were crumbling, stating there was no reason to continue preserving them. A wave of suffocation hit her. She felt like she was drowning in the dry air of the room. She needed to get out, she needed to breathe. She hurried out into the hallway, the heavy clunk of the door echoing behind her. She walked briskly, trying to outpace her own anxiety. Suddenly she stopped. Footsteps approached from the other direction. She looked up, startled. It was Major Markov. He stopped in front of her, his posture rigid and formal. He greeted her, acknowledging her status, but his eyes were cold. This was Heiner's loyal subordinate. He remarked that it had been a while. He added, with a flat tone, that he hoped all was well. But Annette knew better. The subtext hung heavy in the air between them. He didn't hope she was well. He meant that she shouldn't be doing well at all. Annette lowered her gaze, her hand instinctively going to her chest, clutching her dress. She replied quietly that everything was the same as usual. She tried to excuse herself, saying she would be on her way, desperate to escape his judgmental stare. But as she walked past him, Markov spoke again. His voice stopped her in her tracks. He informed her that the commander, Heiner, had received a marriage proposal. Annette froze on the stairs. The words hit her like a physical blow. She turned back slightly, her face pale. Markov continued, clearly enjoying the cruelty of the moment. He asked if she knew of Miss Anneli. He described her as an amazing woman who had executed plans alongside the commander. Markov looked at her with a smirk, asking if she didn't think they would make a lovely couple. Annette stared at him, her expression hollow. She agreed quietly. Indeed. Markov pressed on, predicting that the media would sensationalize the union soon. He looked at her with disdain, asking how long she intended to remain so carefree in the face of all this. He loomed over her, his resentment palpable. He told her plainly that the people wanted her demise. Annette couldn't escape the truth of his words. Everywhere she looked, newspapers, letters, it was the same. They called for the demolition of the monarchy's remnants. Strangers told her that being by Heiner's side was hell for him. They called her his only flaw. They asked if she even knew what people said about this sham of a marriage. Later, she was lying in bed, staring at nothing, when a knock came at the door. The door creaked open. It was Heiner. He called her name. He stepped into the room, his presence dominating the space. He told her he knew she wasn't sleeping and ordered her to listen. He began to explain about the proposal. He said he was going to decline it quietly, but the press had reported it. He told her flatly that either way, he wouldn't take back his decision. He told her to give up her hopes of leaving this place. Annette lay there, her back to him. She wondered silently, if he hated her so much, why wouldn't he just divorce her? It felt as if he refused to even say the word divorce. It was a taboo between them. She finally spoke, her voice muffled by the pillow. She told him that people said she was still living lavishly because of him. They asked why he was still married to her. She rustled the sheets, sitting up slowly. She told him that she was a flaw that must be erased from his life. She looked at him, her eyes searching his cold face. She asked if it was simply that he wanted to watch her wither away by his side. She asked if he still harbored such intense hatred toward her that he would take such risks to his own reputation. Heiner looked at her, his expression unreadable. He said her name, then claimed he never knew if she would live a good life elsewhere if she left. Annette let out a dry, hollow laugh. She asked him if he thought she had an inheritance hidden somewhere. She reminded him that she had nothing and nowhere to go. Heiner suggested that her father had many connections, implying some might be living abroad. Annette shook her head, looking defeated. She told him she didn't need those people or places. For her, the divorce was more than enough. Heiner glared at her then, his eyes narrowing. He told her that seeing her want it so desperately made him want to grant it even less. Annette looked into his eyes, those grey, cold eyes. She asked him when his eyes had been filled with such darkness. She wondered why she hadn't noticed it before. She realized now that his soft smiles, his loving voice, everything she knew of him was not real. She looked at the man she had married. She told him with a mix of awe and horror that he truly was an excellent spy. She stated plainly that she simply no longer wished to live with him. Heiner asked if she resented him for betraying her. Annette denied it immediately. She said she had no reason to resent him. Heiner flinched at that, a crack in his composure. Annette continued, saying she didn't resent anybody. She said she couldn't, even if the whole world resented her. She believed she didn't deserve to feel resentment. She recounted how the newspapers and letters told her she should be destroyed because she was the last of the monarchy. She told him that if that was what was needed, if that was what everyone wanted, she was fine with it. Internally, she thought that even if she met her demise, she didn't want her end to be as his wife. She didn't want to show this broken version of herself to the man she once loved. It was her last bit of pride. Heiner's hand clenched into a fist at his side. The tension in the room spiked. Annette kept repeating the word, divorce, divorce, divorce. Suddenly, Heiner moved. He grabbed her, pulling her close in a rough embrace. The movement was fast, aggressive. He leaned over her, his face inches from hers. He accused her of speaking about divorce so easily because she had lived an easy life. He ordered her to continue to be his wife. He said if there was anything he wanted from her in return, it was this. He wanted her unable to even dream of freedom or happiness. He wanted her to endure the burden of unhappiness and pay for her mistakes right where he could see her. Heiner pulled back, composing himself. He told her there was a hotel opening banquet in a few days and she would be attending with him. He told her to be prepared. Annette asked what would happen if she refused. She asked if he would take her by force. Heiner sighed, a sound of frustration. He threatened her then, cold and serious. He said if she kept going against his word, he might lock her away forever in a psych ward. He warned her that if she wanted to avoid that fate, it would do her good to listen to him. Annette looked at his retreating back as he left. She realized this was who he always was. She had known he approached with ulterior motives, but she had fooled herself. She pressed a hand to her chest. She had denied it. She had brainwashed her own mind over and over again. She had told herself it was because she lost everything. She had told herself he had just temporarily fallen out of love. She had convinced herself that he would come back to her soon, that they would go back to all those moments and seasons when they were in love. She remembered asking him to answer her, desperate for validation. But now, crying and flinching in her room, she asked herself why she didn't realize it sooner. Love derived from usefulness is not love. She admitted how foolish she had been. She sighed, the weight of her insomnia pressing down on her. She muttered to herself, wondering where the pills were. She needed to sleep. She couldn't handle the thoughts anymore. She swallowed a handful of pills, her head tilted back. She fumbled with the bottle, her hands shaking. She set the bottle down with a clack. She stared at the small, round pills in her hand. The sound of them clinking against the container was the only sound in the room. She stood there in the silence, a solitary figure in a cold room, waiting for the oblivion of sleep to take her away from the man who promised her forever and gave her hell. The scene changes to the palace hall, where her expression changes, her expression pained and weary as she admits that the medication she's been taking doesn't seem to be working at all. She looks at the doctor with a quiet desperation, asking if there is perhaps something else he could prescribe her, mentioning that she woke up early again today with a pounding headache. The doctor doesn't offer sympathy. Instead, he remarks dryly that it sounds like she's looking for some kind of perfect medicine. He tells her flatly that headaches are common and there is nothing to be alarmed about, minimizing her pain entirely. She tries one more time, explaining that she's also been feeling nauseous and feverish lately. The doctor brushes this off too, claiming it's likely just stress or a lack of exercise. As he packs up, he delivers a parting insult, telling her that she has a tendency to overreact to minor inconveniences. He reminds her that he is the residential doctor, implying his loyalty lies with the estate rather than being her personal physician. After he leaves, the humiliation deepens. The maids standing behind Annette giggle amongst themselves, whispering about her illness as if it's a joke. Annette sits there, her face pale and shadowed with sadness, listening to the mockery in her own home. She quietly accepts the situation. The scene shifts to a grand social gathering. Music plays and people mingle, but the atmosphere feels heavy with judgment. Heiner and Annette make their entrance. Heiner looks imposing and sharp in his military uniform, while Annette stands by his side, looking delicate and perhaps a bit fragile. A man approaches them, greeting the commander enthusiastically. He congratulates a Mr. Schmidt on his opening, and Heiner shakes the man's hand, giving credit to the man's investment for the success. While the men talk business, discussing trends in France and new branches, Annette stands silently, her gaze lowered, word, completely excluded from the conversation. Annette watches her husband's back. She thinks to herself that she used to find him difficult to read. She knows that no one at this party wants her here, yet Heiner insisted she accompany him to fulfill the bare minimum duties of a wife. As they walk, she hears the murmurs of the crowd. The realization hits her simply. Heiner didn't bring her here for appearances. Since she dared to leave the residence, he likely wanted to cast her into misery by exposing her to the malice of the people here. She takes a sip of a drink, her profile looking incredibly lonely, acknowledging that everyone in the room holds nothing but ill will toward her. Suddenly, a man brings up a sensitive topic to Heiner, a marriage proposal involving someone named Anneli. Heiner declines the offer immediately. The man is surprised, pressing the issue and saying everyone thought they would make a lovely couple. Heiner glances sideways, his expression hardening. He states that it is only right that he refuse. He questions why the offer was made in the first place, his frown deepening, and bluntly states, "I already have a wife." Annette stands right there, listening. Even if the world thinks she is a nobody, it stings deeply that they would discuss her husband's potential remarriage right in front of her face. She grips her own arm, feeling the cruelty of the moment, the sheer disrespect of it all. She squeezes her arm tighter, whispering Heiner's name, wondering what he wants from this situation. The maestro's arrival, the atmosphere shifts as an announcement is made. The host asks if everyone is enjoying the autumn evening and introduces a very special guest to thank them for attending. It is the great maestro, the pride of Pedania, pianist Felix Kafka. Annette's eyes widen in genuine shock. She gasps, recognizing the name immediately. The crowd applauds as Felix is introduced as a genius pianist who has swept international competitions. Annette looks on in awe, unable to believe she gets to hear him play again. Felix sits at the grand piano. Annette watches him, her back to us, completely captivated. He begins to play Nocturne No. 2. As the music flows, Annette's internal monologue reveals her deep connection to this music. She hasn't played in 3 years, but she could never forget that melody. She thinks about how the notes form a message for the ears listening. She remembers Felix being her role model. We see a close-up of Heiner's eyes, watching her reaction, but Annette is lost in memory. She recalls that from the moment she first touched the keys, Felix's performances inspired her to pursue her own dream. The performance ends and the room erupts in bravo and applause. Annette claps enthusiastically, thinking about how she once wanted to be a pianist just like him. She recalls meeting him through her father's connections, getting his autograph and receiving his encouragement. She remembers a moment from the past, smiling happily at an older Felix while her father stood by proudly. But her expression sours as she realizes everything is different now. Felix was a commoner who succeeded against the odds. She realizes now that he must have despised her back then, a privileged noble girl, even if he couldn't show it. The thought strikes her painfully. The pressure to perform suddenly, a voice cuts through her thoughts. Someone asks, "Annette, don't you play the piano as well, Mrs. Waldemar?" Annette flinches visibly, her hand clutching her chest in panic. The crowd turns their attention to her, urging her to play a song. Annette looks down, terrified, stammering that yes, she plays, but the murmurs start again. People recall that she won 3rd place in an international competition and even held a recital. A woman grabs her arm, smiling falsely, while Annette tries to pull away, insisting she hasn't played in a long time and isn't good enough. The crowd dismisses her hesitation as humility. They remind her she learned from a young age. Annette looks desperate. She turns her gaze to Heiner, silently pleading for him to intervene to save her from this. Heiner looks back at her. Instead of helping, he simply says, "It's all right, go on." Annette feels like she's been shoved forward. She stands before the piano, frozen, thinking, "I can't." She looks at the keys, her mind racing. She realizes foolishly that she had expected Heiner to help her. She stares at the keyboard, her eyes looking hollow. She wonders if this humiliation is enough for everyone. She knows they want to see the lucky girl born into aristocracy end up a laughingstock. She thinks to herself that she won't be able to meet their expectations, but for a much darker reason. Her hands begin to tremble violently over the keys. The trauma resurfaces suddenly. The reality of the room falls away. She hears her name being called, but it's not the crowd, it's a memory. "Annette, Annette!" A voice screams, "You have to run." Annette gasps, her eyes wide with terror. The voice yells that there is no time to explain. In the flashback, a silhouette of a man with a gun bursts in. Her father's voice yells at her to get up and go out the back. Then, a loud bang rings out. A gun falls to the floor, lying in a pool of spreading blood near a man's shoe. Annette stammers, "F father," as she hears the drip of blood. Voices from the attackers argue. One claims it was an accident and that they were told not to kill them here. A body falls with a heavy thud. One of the men notices Annette. He He asks, "Oh, isn't this the Marquis's daughter?" He marks her, noting she was leisurely playing the piano. He comments on how noble it is. The aftermath back in the present, the sound of chirping insects brings us to the exterior of the mansion at night. The windows are glowing with light. Inside his office, Heiner sits at his desk reading documents. The room is quiet, but he looks agitated. He flips a page aggressively. He pauses, his eyes narrowing. Suddenly, he curses, "Curse it," and crumples the paper in his hand. We see Annette in the ladies' room. She is hunched over a sink, retching and vomiting, gripping the porcelain until her knuckles are white. Outside the restroom, the party continues. People murmur and mumble, asking what is it, and what's wrong with her. The door to the ladies' room whooshes shut. We cut back to Heiner. He remembers the moment at the piano. He recalls how Annette flinched and looked terrified. He thinks to himself, "I want." Heiner contemplates that moment. He admits to himself that it definitely looked like a sign of trauma. He clenches his fist around the crumpled paper, but then his face hardens. He scoffs at the idea. Trauma? She hasn't shed a single tear in 3 years. He thinks bitterly about how she lived in her safe, giant mansion, holding elegant parties all her life. Trauma? Yeah, right. He sneers internally, his grip tightening until his knuckles pop. He slams his fist down, shouting, "D-it," and swiping the papers off his desk in a fit of rage. As the papers fly through the air, he thinks about how shaken she seemed by a mere piano. Then another memory intrudes, the memory of Annette looking him in the eye and saying, "I want a divorce, Heiner." He remembers how she demanded the divorce with such a straight, emotionless face. He remembers her asking, "Have I any use left?" He sits there in the darkened room, face buried in his hand, looking exhausted and conflicted. He admits to himself, "No, but I can't let you go in peace." He thinks about how she has no idea what he had to put up with to have her. He decides that it doesn't matter how irrational this choice is. We see a flashback of a younger Annette playing the piano, smiling innocently. Heiner thinks of that image, the clumsy, unrequited love of a lonely child. He covers his face, his eye peering through his fingers with a dark intensity. He concludes that all of that is nothing but a past that he now wants to erase. So we open with Annette, alone in the dim light of the room, sitting before the piano that used to mean everything to her. It's the piano from the Rosenberg mansion, a relic of her past life, and she slowly lifts the lid, the heavy wood feeling cold under her fingers. She stares at the keys, remembering that this has been her life since she was barely old enough to walk. She places her hands on the ivory, but the moment she tries to play, her fingers slam down clumsily with a dull thump. It's heartbreaking because her mind still knows exactly where her fingers should go. She knows the melody perfectly, but her hands refuse to listen. It's useless. She can barely even press the keys down with any real strength, let alone play a song, and the realization washes over her in a wave of defeat. Her mind drifts back to the day everything shattered, the day her father died. That was the day her entire career crumbled into dust. She remembers being a child, dressed in pristine white, playing for an adoring crowd, surrounded by power, connections, and money. People used to tell her that those things were the source of her success, minimizing her talent. Sitting there now, she admits to herself that she thought time would heal this wound, that things would get better. But looking at her trembling hand reaching for the keys again, she realizes the truth. She truly has nothing left now, not even the music that defined her. The scene shifts, and we hear the heavy, rhythmic sound of footsteps approaching down the hallway. It's Heiner, and you can practically feel the irritation radiating off him with every step. He's frustrated because she hasn't left the house, and now he's heard she's refusing to eat. To him, this feels like a childish tantrum. He thinks she's acting like a teenager, and it's clearly getting on his nerves. He knocks sharply on her door. When he enters, the room is quiet, and Annette doesn't even turn to acknowledge him. She's focused entirely on her embroidery frame, stitching in silence, refusing to meet his gaze. He asks her with a bite of sarcasm if she's protesting something. He peeks over her shoulder, trying to see her face, but she keeps her head down, quietly telling him it's not a protest and to just ignore her. But then his eyes catch something on the table, a pile of pills scattered there. The sound of the bottle clattering draws his attention, and the atmosphere in the room instantly turns volatile. She jumps, startled, as he suddenly moves, demanding to know what he's looking at. He grabs the bottle, his voice dropping into a dangerous, demanding tone as he asks her what this is. He towers over her, holding the evidence, and demands an explanation. She looks terrified, her eyes wide, stammering that it's just medication. Heiner presses her, asking if Dr. Buakel prescribed these specific pills. Annette tries to defend herself, explaining quietly that those are just the ones she didn't take, that's all it is. He doesn't believe her for a second. He calls it a shameless lie, his expression expression cold and unforgiving. He falls silent for a moment, just glaring at her. With a weary sigh, he tells her that he's ordered her meal to be brought up and that she is to wait right there. He then declares he's confiscating the pills, taking them away from her. She jumps up, panicked, asking him why he's doing that, but the fight drains out of her quickly and she just lets out a soft sound of defeat. She looks down, her face pale, and mumbles that she isn't hungry anyway. Heiner stares at her, his patience thinning. He takes a step closer, looming over her. He asks her brutally if she intends to starve herself to death. Annette turns her head away, repeating firmly that she just doesn't want to eat. He mocks her, asking that if she's going to die, couldn't she think of a more graceful way to do it? He reminds her with a sneer that she is the Rosenberg princess after all. The insult lands with a painful throb in the air between them. She looks at him, her eyes trembling with shock and hurt. The tension is so thick it feels like violence, and she bites her lip to keep from crying out. He gestures to the soup, telling her to go ahead. Annette, clutching her embroidery, asks him quietly to please leave. She promises she'll eat it on her own if he just goes. Heiner doesn't buy it. He accuses her of planning to just send the food back untouched the moment he walks out. She snaps then, turning to face him, asking what it matters to him whether she eats or not. He looks at her, confused by her sudden burst of emotion. He wonders why she's acting so sensitive, so unlike her usual composed self.